that Ash had selected to battle the next day at the Fuchsia City Gym, whenever it was they finally arrived. Watching the aforementioned three Pokémon battle amongst each other in a three-way spar, in perfect sync with one another, Misty nodded before looking back to Giselle. Yeah, well, they are together all the time, even when they aren't with Ash. It had only been about an hour since they had left the site of the construction area for the Giva Dam, and the four of them were now camped out about 10 minutes away, within a clearing in the forest. Brock was nearby, making some stew and the Pokémon food over a small, makeshift fireplace, and Misty and Giselle were cooling down on the ground, in seated stretches, after a quick afternoon training session with their Pokémon. Ash himself, meanwhile, was just finishing up with a set of rigorous ground drills to work off some of his frustration and then stood up. After wiping some sweat from his brow, he called out to the three intensely sparring Pokémon. Alright, you three, that's enough. Take a break. He then walked over and sat down next to Giselle before pulling his backpack towards him from the rock that all of their packs were leaning against. Well, he sniffed and unzipped the top part. That should be good for today. I'm hungry. Giselle looked at him in concern as he pulled out the Cubone egg and placed it in his lap. Ash, are you okay? He looked down at the egg in his lap and sighed. Yeah, I'm fine now. I was just frustrated that anybody could be so unreasonable and arrogant. You're talking about the dam, right? She asked while her Marowak came up and sniffed the egg in Ash's lap. He nodded but didn't expound any further. Though, luckily, Misty was able to change the subject as she asked. Hey Ash, out of curiosity, why did you choose the Pokémon you did for the battle at Fuchsia Gym? He looked at her and then shrugged. Well, I want to get them experience the way they need it right now. Ash looked over at the place where his three aforementioned Pokémon were now resting with Pikachu and Eevee under a tree. Since he had been planning to swap out his team before the Fuchsia City battle anyway, their small lunch break after leaving the construction zone gave him the time he needed to use his Pokédex to switch out his Pokémon. As he watched them and idly rubbed the egg in his lap with both hands, Misty tilted her head. I don't understand why you chose them though when you know the gym we're going to is a poison type 1. The relaxed boy took a few moments to look down at the egg in his hands before answering her question. Type isn't everything, Misty. A battle isn't always decided by moves, base power and stats, abilities or typing. The outcome is decided by a lot more than that. Professor Oak practically drilled that into my head. The orange-haired girl gave a small head nod. Well, yes, I know that, but this seems like a bit of a wild throw together for a team, don't you think? Not really, he responded simply. Professor Oak told me that Pokémon battles are basically like this. Sure, you can plan and plot out your best possible team for a battle based on strategy, typing and skill set. And sometimes that works. Ash shook his head. But this is the real world, not some video game where everything is pre-planned out and there are only so many moves a Pokémon can make. Or where your opponent attacks you and then just stands there like an idiot while you get your turn. He nodded back at his Pokémon. And thank Arceus it isn't. How bored and repetitive would Pokémon battling be if it was like that in real life? In the real world, a good trainer has to plan for any and all outcomes and possibilities. The black-haired Ketchum looked at his female friend squarely. It's like always deciding battles based on type. That's probably one of the biggest racks there are. I mean, in real-life battles between Pokémon, type advantages and disadvantages are not always going to decide the winner. He held a hand up. Take Magnemite for example. It's primarily an electric type but also a steel one too. Now that normally means poison type moves will not be effective on a part steel type like Magnemite, but unlike some goofy game, that won't always be the case. Sometimes, a particular Pokémon might have such a powerful poison type attack that it overcomes another Pokémon's supposed immunity to poison. It's like Pikachu. Electric type attacks typically are not effective in the least against rock types, but with Pikachu's focused lightning, it's not only effective but strong enough to actually break rock. He shrugged at that. Or take that one battle I had with Andy between his Sandslash and my Parasect. Did you ever wonder why I didn't have him use a grass type attack on a ground Pokémon like Sandslash right from the outset? It's because I couldn't. Sandslash was so fast and vicious that Parasect had no time for such an attack, and then, On top of it, using moves like Sandstorm and Dig, Parasect was limited on what he could do. Misty gave a simple nod. Yeah, actually I suppose all of that does make sense actually. If Pokemon battles were like some weird real-life Pokemon game, then it would just get boring and lazy really fast. Giselle chimed in with her own agreement. Yeah, real-life Pokemon battles are like real life itself, totally unpredictable. Ash went to say something else, but just when he was about to, his bag beside of him seemed to suddenly come alive as it lifted up just slightly and then started to get whisked away through the clearing. Almost as though it had come alive. Standing up, Ash yelled, "Hey!" and then began chasing after his pack with Giselle and Misty hot on his trail. Even Brock became curious and abandoned the food as he chased after them. And luckily, the food wasn't something that could easily burn. "Hey!" he yelled out. "Get back here, whoever you are. Give me back my backpack." Whoever the thief was though, they didn't listen and Ash and his friends were forced to chase after them as the crook lead them on a merry chase through the forest and into its deeper recesses. Under low-hanging branches, through thick brush and over fallen logs they followed the fleeing backpack. Ash keeping his eyes firmly on the red and black color even as it sped through the underbrush. "Where is this thing headed?" Misty yelled as she brought her arm up to guard her face from getting slapped with branches and limbs. "I don't know, but we're going to find out," Ash called back without turning around. Eventually, the four of them finally broke through the forest boundary, and as soon as they did, each of them went completely still and their eyes went wide. "Oh, wow!" Giselle breathed in amazement. Ash stepped forward, slowly, and looked out at the sight that awaited them with surprised awe on his own face, mimicked by Misty and Brock. "Yeah, no kidding," he agreed with nothing but a very small head nod. There, stretching out before them was one of the most beautiful forested valleys they had ever seen. While none of them had any idea how long they had chased Ash's backpack through the dense woodland and into the vast reaches of the mountains themselves, what beheld their eyes now was nothing short of breathtaking. The grassy plains that stretched on out before them in the valley were a rich and luscious green, and there were flowers of all shapes and kinds, sprouted up all around that seemed to splash an array of beautiful, all-natural colors to the forest scenery. At the back end of the valley was a gorgeous waterfall that fell in pale blue cascades from the mountain cliff above, and the pool that awaited to collect the water seemed to be pure as glass. Like you could simply step into its cool embrace and melt into the waters beneath like a slowly sinking stone. Even the trees in the valley were tall, healthy and vibrant, the likes of which were rare. Even for some of the forests they had already passed through on their journey. "This place is..." Misty just turned her head slowly as she drank in the beauty and natural splendor awaiting their gazes. "Beautiful. So beautiful. And look." Brock pointed. "Those are Diglett." They followed his finger pointing and saw that, indeed, a whole cadre of the small ground-type Pokémon were busily moving to and fro above ground in the valley. And as they traveled here and there, they left trails of rich, good, upturned earth in their wake. But the Diglett were not alone though, because as Ash focused a little closer on them, he also saw several Dugtrio mixed in with their kindred as they too worked around the valley. "Look," he too pointed. "Those are Dugtrio, Diglett's evolved form." As per usual when he wasn't in a busy gym battle or other such Pokemon match, Ash pulled out his Pokédex and allowed Dexter to give the reading for the two similar species of Pokemon. Something he didn't really need himself but did anyway just for the sake of filling out his Pokédex on behalf of Professor Oak. "Why do you think the Diglett and Dugtrio are here though?" Giselle asked curiously as she watched the kindred species of ground type go about their business while almost all of them had different types of foliage, of some kind, balanced atop their heads. Before any of them could answer her though, Ash's backpack suddenly moved up to them, and as he looked down at it, his eyebrow quirked in confusion. Though, after reaching down to grab his backpack and lift it into the air, he and his friends were greeted to the sight of a Diglett popping up from the ground where the pack had been lying. Diglett. Misty, after blinking once or twice, pointed down at it. "Hey look, I think that Diglett was the one who took Ash's backpack." Pikachu hopped over to the wild Pokémon and sat on his hind feet as he smiled and began gesturing to the ground type. Pikachu Pika Pikachu. Diglett, I, smiling at the other Pokémon, started to reply in its own Pokespeech. Diglett. Diglett dig, Diglett. As they watched both Pokémon converse back and forth, Giselle commented. I think these two know each other. Do you think maybe this is the same Diglett from earlier before that big wreck? Ash, deciding to find out, stepped forward and asked nicely. Hey Diglett, are you the same one we saw earlier? Diglett. It replied as it looked up at him and nodded. Can I please ask why you stole my backpack and brought us here? He asked again. The small ground mole Pokémon nodded once again and then turned around. Diglett. Was all it said though before it began slowly making its way into the valley. I think Diglett wants us to follow it. Giselle observed. Well, let's see what it has to show us then, Ash advised as he situated his pack on his shoulders once more and then started going after Diglett. The others following suit. As they followed Diglett through the pretty, grassy and tree-filled valley, they were continuously greeted to the appealing and pleasant sight of rows upon rows of beautiful wildflowers of various colors. Wow! Ash shook his head. If my mom saw this then she'd probably pass out. These flowers are awesome looking and really healthy too. All around them they continued to see the Diglett and Doug trio move about the valley while performing varying tasks that they were capable of carrying out. From earth moving, which meant upturning new and fresh dirt, to tending to a lot of the greenery and transporting pieces of foliage back and forth, from place to place, the ground-type cousins kept themselves busy. They even could be seen taking old and dead sticks, branches and other brush away from out of the surrounding area and transporting it somewhere out of sight. I wonder. Giselle began. What are they doing? Brock crossed his arms and looked around. You know. I think they're actually taking care of everything in this valley. Ash nodded. I think they are. The Diglett and Doug trio almost seem as though they're tending to all the things that grow around here. Misty smiled at that. Ah, you mean like little gardeners? The black-haired boy nodded and continued to look around before he idly observed. You know what I keep thinking of when I see all this? He gestured at the valley around them. If that dam was put in, all of this lower land here would be completely flooded out and destroyed. Giselle's eyes widened slightly, along with the others. You're right, Ash, those backed up waters would eventually pour out and totally flood all of this land here. Misty scratched her head. But I don't understand, why would they build such a thing knowing that would happen? Brock furrowed his eyebrows. They probably either haven't considered it or if they have, maybe just don't see this land as being worth worrying about since people don't live here. I don't want to think like that, but it could be a possibility. Ash looked back at his friends. Regardless, we need to go back and let everyone know about what that dam will destroy if it's completed. His friends quickly nodded in agreement, but just before they could turn around and rush back to their campsite, Diglett came up to them again and made its presence known. Diglett. Ash turned and looked down at the diminutive ground type and smiled at it. Don't you worry, Diglett. I think I understand why you brought us here now, and you have my word, we'll do what we can to keep that dam from being built. He watched the small brown-skinned Pokémon give him an eye smile and a quick reply of, Diglett. Before he and his friends hurried out of the small valley and back through the forest to their camp area. It was only a short time after arriving back at their campsite that they heard a loud noise coming from somewhere back near the construction zone. Looking in the direction of the noise as he stared out through the trees, Ash questioned aloud. Do you guys hear that? The three of them nodded while Misty spoke for Giselle and Brock. Yeah, it sounds almost like someone is yelling or something. Sounds like it's coming from the construction site, Brock observed. Deciding to check it out, they quickly packed up their campsite and then headed back to the construction zone. Shortly after arriving, they made their way into the heart of the construction zone where a large crowd of presumably Pokémon trainers were gathered in front of a large construction frame with yellow sheets draped across its surface in sections. Standing in front of the big metal frame, on a stack of wooden planks, was the construction foreman. Whom of which had a megaphone in his hand as he shouted to the assembled trainers about the threat that the Diglett posed. Seeing and hearing this, as well as the big sign behind the foreman that had the image of a Diglett with a purple X through it, caused Ash to snort in disgust. That idiot doesn't even have any idea what he's talking about. If he would have seen what we did in that valley, he might have changed his tune a little bit. His friends nodded in agreement as they focused more closely on what the foreman was saying. I want to thank all of you Pokemon trainers for coming all this way here out of the way of your journeys to help us with this major problem we have been facing. He then gestured at the sign behind him. Here you see the greatest insect Pokemon threat the world has ever known. Diglett. At that moment, however, he was interrupted by a hand being raised up into the air and the voice of Gary himself speaking out. Excuse me. Diglett isn't even a bug type at all, let alone an insect. In fact, the term mole Pokemon would be more accurate. With a height of approximately 8 inches and a weight of 2 pounds, it could hardly be even classified as the world's greatest anything. That may seem true, but when they work together, they are practically unstoppable. The foreman responded with a stressed-out frown on his face. When working in tandem, they can destroy anything. Yeah, well, I don't really agree with what you said, Gary. Ash spoke up from back in the crowd. A crowd in which parted so they could all see Ash standing near the back with his friends around him. Hey, Gary questioned. What's that, Ashy boy? You doubting my Pokemon genius? He sneered. Frowning, Ash shook his head. No. I'm just wondering what makes you think that you can judge what Pokemon are great or average. Just because Diglett may be small doesn't mean they don't have greatness of their own. You can't judge a Pokemon just because of the species they come from. All the other trainers' eyes were on him as Gary smirked. Thoughts like that are fine for hopeless losers like you that live in dreamland, but for real Pokemon trainers, we have to go by the facts. Before anything else was said though, a rumbling sound could suddenly be heard. This was followed by the foreman going wide-eyed as he panicked. It is the Diglett. They are here. Panning their gazes over to the trio of buses that had brought all the Pokemon trainers, the gathered traveling trainers saw a line of dirt speeding towards one of the buses under the earth. The speed being almost too fast to follow with the naked eye, so quick was the rate at which the Diglett moved beneath the earth. Almost all eyes watching went wide as they saw the upturned line of dirt, showing the path of the moving Diglett, move underneath the bus, and then, as if a sinkhole had suddenly opened beneath it, the large vehicle fell straight into a big pit. With the foreman panicking through his megaphone behind them, all the trainers looked on in awe at the way the Diglett so easily wrecked one of their buses. Gary, on the other hand, decided to take action and ran up while pulling out a Pokeball. I'll take care of this. Now it's time to show everyone the #1 Pokemon trainer in action. The long, spiky brown-haired boy then kissed the ball in his hand before tossing it out into the air. However, to his surprise, the Pokeball hit the ground, and just as it snapped open and the Pokemon within began to emerge, the light energy of the ball quickly reversed course and got pulled right back inside of it. If that wasn't enough, a pile of earth emerged under the Pokeball and dragged it back across the ground to Gary. Then, with a small announcement of Diglett, one of the small ground Pokemon popped up from the earth and offered Gary his Pokeball atop its head. Oh, ah. The grandson of Professor Oak knelt down and took the ball. Thanks. Oh, wait a minute. He quickly threw his arms up and scowled as the Diglett disappeared. No way. No, Diglett's gonna make a fool of Gary Oak. He smirked and then pulled out another Pokeball. Let's see how this works. My best Pokemon. The cocky trainer then kissed the ball thrice before tossing it out to release the Pokemon it held within. Unfortunately though, the ball this time barely even cracked open upon landing before it once again sealed itself up and prevented the Pokemon inside from coming forth. What? He yelled in disbelief and frustration. Fine. Gary then commenced to tossing Pokeball after Pokeball while growling. I'll just use every Pokemon I have. The arrogant young man's rash antics were quickly followed by the large group of other trainers too. Each one began throwing their own Pokeballs out, and every single ball, much like Gary's, refused to open. This led to, eventually, a massive pile of Pokeballs forming in the middle of the construction zone. Humorously enough, the Diglett began taking ball after ball from the pile and delivered them back to their perplexed and stunned-looking trainers. Each one taking their Pokeball with nothing more than a dumbfounded, thanks, or some other word of awkward gratitude. For their part, however, Ash and his friends just stood back and watched the debacle play out before them, with Misty making an offhanded comment. Well, At least they're polite. Brock nodded and put his hands on his hips. And unstoppable too. Soon enough, the foreman began chasing the Diglett over the ground while trying to whack them with a mallet, just like he was playing an arcade game of Whack-A-Diglett. Seeing this, Gary scoffed and put the last of his Pokeballs away. That's a total waste of time. Diglett can pull their heads below the earth at practically the speed of light, that'll never work. He then turned and looked at the Diglett, which were just finishing up taking the last of the other trainers' Pokeballs to them. And the Pokémon obviously won't come out of their Pokeballs, so all this is just a waste of time. Ash, who was nearby, merely deadpanned at his childhood friend with thin eyes. Gee, why think? What have I been trying to say all this time? The other pallet boy looked back at him and shot a condescending grin in his direction. Nah, the Pokémon just all realize how big of a waste of time this is too, and they don't want to mess around with it. You were just a coward, Ash, that didn't wanna try. Disgraceful. The black-haired boy facepalmed and sighed to himself as Gary walked over to his car and waved over his shoulder. Well, this is nothing more than a waste of time, and Gary Oak has better things to do than stand around and play childish games. Jumping up on top of the back of the red convertible, he held a fist to his chest valiantly and stuck the other one skyward. I must continue on my way. To train to become a Pokémon master. As he sat down and the girls, his fan club, joined Gary in the car, the driver spun rubber and started to take off while he waved behind himself again. See ya, peoples. Smell ya later. Once the car was out of sight down the road, Ash sighed again and peeked through his fingers. I'd love to know how someone as humble and earnest as Professor Oak could have such an arrogant and egotistical grandson. Brock, only barely managing to keep from chasing after the car full of girls, turned and looked back at the others' trainers, who seemed to be taking Gary's example and were now beginning to file away back to the buses so they could depart, leaving a very frustrated construction foreman in their wake who wouldn't stop trying to bash the Diglett with a big mallet. I suggest we leave too, you guys, or at least head back to the campsite. Maybe rest for a while and even camp here for the night, since we should be arriving in Fuchsia City tomorrow sometime. The others nodded in agreement and then left the construction zone, hearing nothing but the sounds of whop, 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 and the loud shouts of curse you, Diglett, as they walked off. XXXXXXXXXXXXX. Later that night, Ash and his friends could be seen soaking in the nearby hot springs of what would have become the Giva Hot Spring Resort, should the dam actually ever end up getting completed. Even though they technically never got the tickets needed to get into the hot spring, common sense had won the day when Brock surmised that with the dam not being completed, therefore no resort officially existing either, no one technically owned the hot spring. Nor did it give anyone any right to chase them out. So, at the current time, all four friends were leisurely soaking their aches and pains away from the earlier evening's harsh training. Ash was sitting up against one of the sides of the hot spring, bare-chested obviously, with Giselle sitting next to him. His pretty brunette girlfriend being dressed in a two-piece bathing suit that was pink with white polka dots. Her hair was also pulled up into a high bun on her head. Interestingly, Misty was also sitting with Ash, though directly in front of him, dressed in an orange bikini top with blue bottoms. And while some may have found something a little improper about the aforementioned positioning, it was nonetheless giving Ash the ability to rub his fingers into her neck and shoulders. It was all, ultimately, in an effort to help alleviate some of the soreness she was experiencing from all the intense training she herself had been engaging in along with her Pokémon. As the young man rubbed his fingers into her skin, the orangish flame-haired girl rolled her head from side to side while moaning. Oh, Ash, that feels so good. Not really thinking about just how risque the comment sounded, she continued on, nonplussed all the same. Your fingers are magic. Smiling, he responded with a chuckle. Thanks. I've just always been good at this for some reason. I used to rub my mom's neck and feet for her when they'd get sore. Giselle, whom appeared to be the pinnacle of relaxed, nodded with a content sigh as she sat close to him, her side touching his. Aren't they though, Misty? I still feel the tingles from where he did me. His fingers can just reach so deeply inside of you, can't they? Don't you just feel it all the way up into your belly? Misty nodded and then moaned again as he hit yet another sensitive bundle of nerves. Oh yes, yes, that's the spot, Ash. Right in there. Go as deep as you can. Brock, for his part, just watched from a short ways away as he leaned back against his own corner of the hot spring. He was desperately attempting to keep the amused smile off his face since, even though he knew they didn't realize it, the words coming from Giselle and Misty would seem to anyone else that didn't know the context to be something highly inappropriate for two girls their age to be engaging in. He also had a moment to silently reflect on and observe what he was currently seeing. Even though she was sitting so close just so that Ash could rub her neck and shoulders, Brock wasn't blind. He could tell that his younger female friend was sitting just a little closer back against Ash than needed. Especially given that said young man had a girlfriend, in Giselle, whom was also sitting right next to him. The former Pewter City gym leader had been watching close enough over the last few months that they'd been traveling together, and he was easily able to pick up the very noticeable signs that Misty was attracted to Ash as something far more than a friend. It made sense, of course. She was a young lady whom was almost 13 herself, and developing attractions to boys would be something that Misty would definitely start to have happen. Brock had been able to tell, by the subtle mannerisms in which Misty interacted with Ash compared to himself, that she fancied the messy-haired trainer. But since she was somewhat more awkward and not as comfortable with her femininity as Giselle obviously was, dealing with such feelings was something that Misty struggled with. In fact, Brock had the feeling that if Ash wasn't so abnormally mature and acted instead like most normal 10-year-old boys did, he and Misty would most likely clash a lot. For his part, Ash would probably get into fights because he would have a young man's penchant to spout off at the mouth without considering a girl's feelings first on the matter. And as for Misty, she would probably lash out due to her unresolved feelings. Most likely violently as well, given her personality. However, as Brock had observed, that wasn't the case at all. Ash was not a normal 10-year-old boy, and in many ways, he oddly acted like a grown man in several respects. This, quite naturally, involved members of the opposite sex too. While Brock always counted himself as a very early bloomer that had been noticing girls as young as 5 years old, he knew from that same experience that Ash was identical to him in such a respect. Only with marginally greater success, he was loath to admit. The fact that Ash had amazingly caught the interest of Giselle, a girl 3 years older than him, was impressive by his standards, but it also only proved that Ash didn't see or treat girls in the way most 10-year-olds would. But, even more so than that, Brock had the very sneaking suspicion that when it came to Ash's interactions with Misty, his own intentions may not have been as platonic as they seemed. While relationships at any such age were silly and just a passing thing, regardless of who it involved, Brock found himself rather stunned at the apparent ease and willingness Ash had in not necessarily denying Misty's feelings. Indeed, while he wasn't overt about it, just the general signs Brock noticed Ash show towards Misty seemed to reveal a possible hidden truth that he too held feelings for the water-type enthusiast. Brock had noticed that in the same soft, caring and gentlemanly actions Ash showed with Giselle, he did likewise with Misty. Such as giving her a massage at the present moment. Of course, he occasionally bantered with Misty, but from Brock's perspective, it was never serious and almost always appeared playful in nature. Like such a thing was just how they naturally interacted together. In that way, the dynamics between Ash's relationships with both girls were something to behold. With Giselle, Brock noticed that Ash treated her like glass most of the time. Not in a way that she couldn't handle herself, but more as in, he knew she was a lady, who knew she was a lady, and took great care to nurture that side of her. He treated her like the classy young woman she wanted to be treated as. Misty, on the other hand, was far more tomboyish, to put it simply, than Giselle. She wasn't afraid to get dirty, down and hardcore if she needed to, and on top of all that, Misty also had a hellacious temper. The kind that made her completely unafraid to allow some very unladylike language to leave her lips when she got pushed too far. But even for the girls' differences, they still had the same similarities in that both of them were just that, young ladies. And even Misty, in her own ways, wanted to be treated as such during the appropriate moments. And for Brock, what astounded him was the ease in which Ash, a 10-year-old boy, so easily navigated around both girls' vast personality differences but yet still managed to treat them both as though they were equally important to him. Even though Giselle was technically his girlfriend. In many ways, to Brock's eyes, aside from the signs of affection he showed Giselle, it seemed as though Ash were actually involved in some kind of a strange, three-way relationship with the girls. And in another way, the squinty-eyed teen had to wonder if that was how Ash either saw it or was subconsciously seeing it. Like at the moment, as Brock watched them, Ash and Misty seemed for all the world to be as comfortable as could be with each other. Like they were already involved and had perfect chemistry. Likewise, Giselle somehow seemed to fit that mold out in a very strangely perfect manner since, as she sat next to Ash, she appeared to either not notice or even care about her boyfriend's closeness with the other girl. Indeed, Giselle seemed to never blink an eye at the almost intimate ways Ash would interact with Misty. And this led Brock to believe that she was either completely oblivious or, somehow, the three of them were falling slowly into some kind of unnatural love triangle that appeared more willing than opposed. In all actuality, Brock figured that unless his friends were just master deceivers that had him fooled, the three of them probably didn't even notice what was going on between them. They most likely were entirely ignorant that it seemed to all the world that they were taking the first, very infantile steps in achieving every man's wet dream. Brock's included. A multi-relationship. In many ways, the young man had to almost slap himself in disbelief that something so many men would kill to have, Ash and the two girls with him effortlessly appeared to be falling into without even trying. Or even noticing it. As if to further drive his point home, Brock saw Ash turn his head and place a very light kiss on Giselle's lips, which she returned. At the same time, he saw Misty go tense as she saw this out of the corner of her peripheral vision. It was a subtle action one had to watch for to see, like Brock, and he figured she mostly did it out of primal, jealous instinct. Though, amazingly, and what only further proved his theory, was how that Ash, in his kiss with Giselle, seemed to be able to feel Misty going tense. And then, as if he subconsciously somehow knew the reason for it, Brock watched very closely as Ash tightened the hand he had on Misty's collarbone. It was a soft action and very gentle. Again, nearly missable in every way. But for Brock, he could see the way Ash did it and it was almost as though, through that one-hand squeeze on her neck, the enigmatic boy was silently communicating and saying, "It's okay, you're just as important, I haven't forgotten you're here." What further amazed Brock too was how Misty's body immediately relaxed at the soft gesture and subconscious communique. Indeed, everything about the strange relationship between his three friends appeared to be entirely subconscious, almost instinctual, in all of their interactions. Even as Ash ended the kiss with Giselle and returned his focus to Misty, Brock watched him do so in a way where the palate trainer's hands returned to massaging her like he was now treating her with intimacy. In fact, as he watched, Brock saw Misty meld back into Ash until she was almost sitting up against him. Something that neither he nor Giselle seemed to notice or care about. Without a doubt, Brock would be bold-faced lying to anyone if he were to say that he wasn't curious to see just how Ash, Misty and Giselle's unique relationship evolved as they got older and the more physical aspects of a man and woman's interactions became apparent. If they still knew each other up to that time, of course. The oldest member of the group was interrupted from his inner musings though as Ash suddenly spoke up. "You know something? I have to wonder, is there a way we can stop that dam from being built?" As in completely. You know I've been wondering the same thing. Giselle admitted as she looked up at the night sky. "I wish we could somehow." "Yeah, but that foreman is a stubborn man," Brock stated. "I highly doubt he would change his mind for just any reason. It would have to be enough of something to really rock him and make the man want to give up this crazy idea to build the dam. But if he somehow did, that would stop the future of the dam in its tracks, right?" Giselle asked. "I mean, he did say that the real estate tycoon or whoever it was that hired his company could only find them willing enough to do it. Or something about they were the only ones with the kind of experience and resources that the developer trusted enough to do this. If they backed out, the ones who hired them would probably be forced to abandon this venture entirely." Ash nodded thoughtfully as he finally finished massaging Misty's neck and shoulders. Yeah, Giselle, that's actually a good idea and you're probably right. The only issue is, like Brock said, what would actually get that foreman to stop? Misty, having returned to turning around and lying on the edge of the spring with her arms resting on the warm, natural stone beneath her, sighed and looked out towards the surrounding forest. I wish the answer would just present itself. Almost as if in answer to her desire, Pikachu suddenly perked up and looked out into the forest as his ears raised. Pika. Ash, hearing his Pokémon, looked back to the rock Pikachu was lying on and asked. Hey, what is it, Pikachu? Instead of answering though, the little electric type just hopped down and went over to stare at a spot on the ground near the hot spring pool. Within seconds, the earth began to move before a hole opened up and a Diglett appeared from inside of it with a chirpy, Diglett. Turning around and looking to where Pikachu was sitting, they all watched the Diglett appear and Giselle blinked at the newest arrival. A Diglett. What's it doing here? Misty doubled while Ash saw the Diglett look at him, specifically, and I smile. Diglett. At that, his eyes widened for a moment in realization before he pointed. Hey, I think that's the same Diglett from before. Really? Giselle asked in surprise. You think? Yeah, I do, I think so. He then got closer to the edge and leaned forward. What's the matter, Diglett? Is there something wrong? Diglett. The little tunneling Pokémon responded back. Dig, Diglett, dig. Ash blinked a time or two at the seeming urgency in the ground type's voice before he looked back at his friends. Hey guys. I think Diglett wants us to get out and follow it. What? Why? Giselle asked as she leaned back against the hot spring bank. I don't know. He shook his head. I just feel like we need to. I think Diglett wants to help us somehow. No one really understood, but they decided to just go on faith as they all got up out of the water and then went about getting dressed. A short time later, the four of them were following Diglett through the woods as they headed back in the direction of what they were able to tell rather quickly was the construction site. Why do you think Diglett is taking us back there? Misty asked as they ran to keep up with Diglett. I don't know, but it must be pretty urgent, Brock replied. It's moving fast. Eventually, they came back out to the main area of the construction zone where they saw the foreman still attempting to hit the Diglett in the ground with a heavy hammer. He's still at it. Seriously. Giselle's face was aghast in disbelief. It's been hours now. Yeah, talk about having good cardio and endurance, Misty commented astutely. Ash, however, looked down at the Diglett that had led them there and appeared thoughtful for a time before looking back at the foreman once more. As he did, inspiration seemed to strike him as he simply moved forward and called out to the foreman. Excuse me. The man stopped banging his mallet around for a second and looked up to see Ash and his friends standing nearby. Frowning as he spotted them though, the foreman went back to swinging his mallet at the elusive Diglett while grunting a reply. What do you tree huggers want? Sighing, Ash stepped forward again. Look, I have no problems with the idea of what you're doing and we aren't tree huggers. We just thought that what you were doing without taking the proper steps first was irresponsible and now, we know for a fact that this dam shouldn't go in. At that, the foreman completely stopped and looked back at them again. What are you saying? What do you know? You are children. Sir, please listen. Giselle stepped forward. There is a valley here in this forest that is incredibly beautiful and we think it's probably home to a lot of Pokémon. Yeah, and even more so, Misty pointed at the Diglett that had led them. These Diglett and their evolved form, Dugtrio, basically maintains and takes care of this mountain. It's really an amazing sight to see, Brock witnessed as he held a hand out. I'm serious, it's incredible. Ha! Who cares? We have a job to do and it must be done. The foreman yelled back. Ash, however, spoke patiently and imploringly. I tell you what, we'll make you a deal. If you come with us and just give this valley a look, we'll leave and never bother you again. You have our word. Growling in frustration as the Diglett in front of him disappeared under the earth and didn't come up again, the foreman looked at them for the third time and snorted. I do not have time for childish games. Please, just do this with us and we won't bother you anymore, Ash said with a serious face. All we're asking is for you to just come with us. Please. The bearded man stared at Ash for a time before sighing in annoyance. Oh, very well. I will come with you, but after this, you must leave this site and let us return to our work. I will humor you, but only this once and no more. The four of them shared a smile with each other before Ash nodded and turned around. Follow us then. A short time later, Ash and his friends, plus the construction foreman, could be seen making their way through the forest as they approached the valley of the Diglett. Moving a branch out of his face that had just slapped him, the foreman growled. How far away is this place? We're almost there, the black-haired boy with the Pikachu and Eevee called back. Just a little further. They could hear his incessant grumbling, but, in the course of only a few minutes, they finally stepped out of the woods and into the beautiful valley from earlier in the day. The foreman himself was the last in line to exit the forest, and as he did, he hopped out while kicking a branch from his boot. Okay. I've done what you kids asked and followed you out here through this accursed forest. Now what is it that you want me to? He trailed off though as he came up to stand beside the others and got his first good look at the valley stretching out before him. In fact, so flabbergasted was he by what he saw that when he finished his sentence, it was with an almost whispered, "See." As the bearded construction foreman looked around the valley, his mouth stood agape and his eyes were wide. An expression that showed his increasing awe and amazement. The sight of the shining evening dew upon the grass of the vibrant green fields, the rows upon rows of breathtakingly beautiful flowers and the majestic waterfall at the rear of the valley, cascading down in colors of vibrant blues and white, had the foreman opening and closing his mouth a few times. Further on still, he could see a variety of different Pokémon now out and about as they enjoyed the pristine peace and stillness of the secluded valley. And if that wasn't enough, he could also see all the Diglett and Dugtrio moving about all around as they cared for and tended to the valley. I never would have thought. His voice came out choked and full of disbelief. That such beauty could be found so near the site of the dam we have been building. He then took his hard hat off, as if he were either mourning or in a state of great humility. Never have I seen such natural beauty. He then looked over at Ash and his friends. Is this why the Diglett have been trying so hard to interfere with our work? Ash nodded and then gestured down at their Diglett, whom was above ground near Pikachu and V. The Diglett and Dugtrio have been trying to stop you from making that dam all this time, for this very reason. Brock nodded. They're like little caretakers for this entire area. The foreman stepped forward and looked around. And if the dam were to be finished, all of this would flood. They nodded to his postulation and he dropped his head. I feel so foolish. He looked up again and allowed his eyes to scan throughout the valley. This may seem like a quick turnaround, but when I was a boy, my father used to take me hiking up in mountains like this. It was the only time we ever got to spend together, and I had forgotten after all these years just how beautiful nature could be. He then turned around once more and looked back at the four trainers. I am sincerely sorry for not listening earlier. I was so obsessed with completing the dam that I didn't care about or think of anything else. If you would not have shown me this then, I would have never known it existed and we would have destroyed it without knowing. Giselle stepped forward. Does this mean that you're going to stop construction of the dam? The foreman looked at her and nodded. On good conscience, I could not complete the dam after seeing all of this. He then sighed. It will not be easy losing this contract, but seeing as how there really would need to be environmental reviews done now in light of what I have seen, we could not even build the dam legally at this point. There are too many lives to be put at risk. But won't the developer that hired you just hire another possibly? Misty asked, even though they all were relatively sure they knew the answer. No. He shook his head. We are the biggest construction company in Kanto, and environmental structures, such as dams, are what we specialize in. If we do not do this, then most likely, it will not get done. Ash and his friends had to suppress the urge not to smile and show their joy, but they managed as the aforementioned boy stepped toward the foreman. You're doing the right thing, though I'm sorry that you're going to lose so much money, I'm sure. The bearded man gave a small smile. Yes, it will be difficult losing this job, but on good conscience, after seeing this, even through all of my earlier bluster to the contrary, I could never allow the dam to be built. Just as Ash was about to reply, a loud explosion suddenly rocked the area and caused all of them to whip around and see a big cloud of smoke rising into the air in the direction of the construction area. That came from the site of the dam. The foreman announced. "Come on, let's go." Ash yelled out before all of them took off running back to the construction zone. After hurrying through the forest for a short time, they finally made it back to the construction zone and found the cause of the earlier explosion. "What in the world is going on here?" the foreman shouted as he looked around and saw a massive hole in the ground, very close to the dam itself. "Who made that hole?" Misty demanded. "It looks like a load of dynamite went off." Looking farther ahead, they saw the source of the crater as they spotted Jesse, James and Meowth standing back near a large pile of dynamite. All three of them were wearing hard hats and Meowth was standing in front of a detonator switch box. "Oh, why am I not surprised?" Ash yelled as he clenched his fists. "Anytime something happens, you three are always responsible for it." Ahahaha. Jesse laughed and went to strike a pose. "Prepare for trouble." James, sliding up next to her, went to do the same thing. "And make it daub." "Shut up." Both of them promptly face-faulted to the ground as Ash and his friends went, big head mode, and viciously shouted down their annoying motto. "We don't wanna hear your stupid freaking motto." Misty growled. "It's not even that good." "Ooh, how dare you." Jesse hopped up with pointed teeth and a venomous glare. "Stop interrupting our motto, you little rail-thin orange." "You mean, wrinkly old hag." Misty shot back. "What?" Jessie practically screamed back as several veins appeared on her forehead and she clenched a fist at Misty. "Old. Wrinkled. I'll blow you to smithereens for that, you snot-nosed little." Having heard enough, Ash stepped forward. "Why are you three here? And what do you think you're doing?" Focusing on Ash, Jessie allowed her anger to dissipate a little and instead turned to snarky arrogance as she crossed her arms and smirked. "Why, we're just doing what we heard that little man with horrible fashion sense say he wanted earlier." She gestured at the foreman as Meowth piped up. "Yeah. He said he wanted someone to take care of them Diglett, and originally, we were gonna just catch all the Pokémon that belonged to them trainers earlier. But," James flipped his hair back and smirked as well. "We quickly realized that we couldn't take on all those Pokémon trainers by ourselves, so." Jessie finished for him. "We decided to just try our hand at catching all of these Diglett instead. By blowing them out of the ground." Giselle yelled back. "You three are sick and disgusting." Misty spat. "Call us what you want, but we're only doing what he would have ended up doing anyway." Jessie finished smugly as she pointed at the foreman. Realizing she was right from how horribly he had acted toward the Diglett earlier, he looked down and frowned slightly. "She is right. I was terrible to the Diglett before. I am no different than these three." "That isn't true," Ash stated firmly over his shoulder. "You came to your senses and decided to make amends. These three never do. You aren't anything like them." He then pointed at the three rockets. "We're gonna send you three packing just like we always do." Just before he was about to order Pikachu and V to attack them though, Jessie held up a finger and shook it while grinning. I wouldn't do that if I were you." "Yeah," Meowth gloated. "See, we raided dat storehouse where all da dynamite was at and then we placed 'em all under da ground around ya. So one wrong step and." James winked and snickered condescendingly. Boom. Ash and his friends all stopped and stepped back with wide eyes as they looked down at the ground while the foreman looked at the rockets and growled. "You rotten thieves. How dare you do this? Talk is cheap." Jessie gave her trademark smirk. "But pay, dirt, is always so much sweeter." "Hey," Meowth sneered. "And da dirt's exactly what you'll be eatin' if ya even think about sickin' ya Pokémon on us." The three rockets all laughed in tandem together and Ash gritted his teeth at them as he realized they were truly in a tight situation. However, before he could give the matter much more thought, the ground right in front of him shook for a moment before, in a quick popping motion, the same Diglett from all the other times appeared at the surface. And not only was it above ground but a small cluster of dynamite was balanced on its head that Team Rocket had buried in the earth. "Diglett," Ash voiced in surprise as the ground type looked up at him and I smiled. "Diglett. Hey. What's that little mole rat doing?" Jessie demanded. "It stole some of the dynamite we stole fair and square." James fumed as he raised and shook a fist. No thievin' da thieves. Meowth shouted just as the entire earth around the area of the dam began to shake, tremble and quake. Like an earthquake was beginning to start. What's happening? Giselle grabbed onto Ash's arm to keep from falling as all of them widened their stance to keep their balance. Meowth, did you flip the switch again? Jessie demanded as she and James weaved back and forth to keep on their feet. I didn't do anything. The cat Pokémon stammered back just as the earth and ground all around started to open up in a multitude of different holes. From each hole then either came a Diglett or a Dugtrio, whom had a cluster of dynamite balanced on each of their heads. Hey look! Misty pointed. The Diglett and Dugtrio pulled all the dynamite out of the ground. After she said that, the Diglett that had been keeping around Ash and his friends started to tunnel its way over to the rocket trio before popping up right before them. The three crooks blinked down at the ground type as it appeared mere inches in front of them. All three making a collective sound of, huh. Just as Diglett I smiled at them and disappeared back beneath the earth with a quick, Diglett. It left the dynamite? James questioned in a confused tone as he, Jessie and Meowth stared down at the pack of explosives Diglett had brought to their feet. Although, within seconds, all the other Diglett and Dugtrio did the same thing. Each one tunneling over to them and leaving a red cluster of dynamite with the criminal trio until, by the time they were done, a small mound of it was piled up in front of them. Feeling a sinking weight in his gut, Meowth's sweat dropped. I got a bad feelin' about this, you guys. Sure enough, immediately after they had finished returning all the dynamite to Team Rocket, the horde of Diglett and Dugtrio disappeared below the ground. But it wasn't for long. Once again, a loud shaking could be heard, but this was even stronger and more powerful than the first. And then, in one swift motion, the ground in front of Ash and his friends erupted skyward and began climbing and building into a giant wall of dirt and rock. The earthen tidal wave, if that was what it could be called, didn't tarry as it soon began surging forward across the length of the construction site, burying any and everything in its path, including vehicles, tools and other equipment. Even worse than that was as the tsunami of earth tore across the ground, it grew even bigger and bigger until it was soon an unstoppable force. Look! Misty pointed as she spotted all of the Diglett and Dugtrio inside of the wave of dirt. The Diglett and Dugtrio are controlling it. All eyes watched in fascination as the veritable force of nature at its angriest bore down upon the trio of now terrified-looking rockets. Ah! Jessie, James and Meowth screamed and clutched onto each other just as it fell down upon them like an actual wave crashing upon the shores of a beach. Then, like a tidal wave once it reached land, the large mass of earth began spreading across the remaining length of the construction site like a mudslide until it eventually reached the partially finished dam and struck it broadside. With the sound of a deafening crash, earth met steel and refined gave way to the unrefined. Like a tower being toppled from the base, Ash and the others watched in fascination as the dam fell right before their eyes and was laid into a ruined pile of metal and braces in mere seconds. When the destruction was finally past, all that could be seen left of the construction site was a swath of heavily mounded earth and mud. A visible testimony to the wrath of nature brought about by a group of Pokémon that many would call insignificant. Wow! Giselle breathed. Look at that, they completely destroyed everything. Even the dam, Brock said in amazement. Such power and force, incredible. Ash and Misty were still struck speechless, but the foreman merely lowered his head and sighed. Well, I suppose we were going to have to do something about the dam regardless if we weren't going to finish it, but. Catching on, Ash turned to him and frowned in remorse for the man. Yeah, all your equipment was destroyed too. I'm sorry about that. The bearded supervisor dropped his shoulders. Perhaps that was simply just recompense for how I had treated the Diglett before. He then looked out at the destroyed dam. Though I suppose I should just be thankful. If the Diglett could have done this all along, then I am grateful they did not do it in a way in which harmed myself or any of my men. Almost as if on cue, several places throughout the now buried construction site began to tremble and shake before the ground started to open. Then, in those same places, arose much of the equipment, vehicles and tools that they had all assumed destroyed by the earthen tidal wave. As the bulk of all of the construction company's equipment rose to the surface once more, The reason behind it was soon shown as several heads of Diglett and Dugtrio appeared around the risen equipment. Would you look at that? Brock put his hands to his hips and smiled. The Diglett really are polite after all. The foreman appeared at a loss for words at the sight of his dirty, mud-covered but mostly unharmed equipment. Then, right in front of their feet, Diglett appeared yet again. Looking down at the friendly little ground type, Ash smiled and walked up to it. That was really nice of you and your friends Diglett, thank you. The foreman, as well, nodded and dropped his head to the small Pokémon. Yes Diglett, thank you. You have my most sincere gratitude for your kindness and I deeply apologize for my earlier actions. Please forgive me. Diglett, though, just upturned its eyes kindly and wiggled its nose in a sign of acceptance. Diglett. Well hey Diglett, Ash smiled down at it again. I guess you guys just showed how great and powerful you can really be huh? You sure proved Gary wrong. Diglett, Diglett. The ground Pokémon chanted up at Ash as it continued to smile with its eyes up at him. You know, Misty spoke up with a small, amused smile of her own as she stared out at the biggest pile of earth that now covered over where the dam used to be. A spot in which had the sign for the Give a Dam laying shredded and destroyed atop the mound, as if a memorial to the toppled structure. I feel a little bad for Team Rocket. It'll probably take them forever to tunnel themselves out of there, if they actually survived of course. Oh they made it, Ash said with surety. They wouldn't be taken out that easily. Yeah and besides, Giselle smiled. They'll never learn their lesson. The foreman stepped forward. Not like me. I have learned my lesson. He then looked back at the group of friends. And if it would not have been for you four, I would never have realized just how misguided my actions truly were. So thank you. Ah, Ash waved him off nonchalantly. Don't worry about it. We're just happy that we could help keep this valley safe. And hey, those Diglett and Dugtrio are pretty good diggers, Brock began in an amused tone. Maybe you could convince a few to come on and be part of your construction team. All five of them shared a laugh at that while Pikachu and V were busy communicating with Diglett at their feet. Well, Ash began with a smile still on his face from the laughter a few seconds later. I guess if we want to get to our destination by tomorrow, we'll need to get ready and leave here soon. His friends nodded in agreement while Brock turned and pointed at the mountain range in front of them. Since Fuchsia City is right over on the other side of that mountain, we should get there by early tomorrow sometime. We can head back to where we had lunch earlier today and camp there for the night and then get up early tomorrow morning and head over the mountain. I wish you the best of luck on your journeys my young friends, the foreman said with a smile. And when I go back to the campsite that my own men are staying at farther down the mountain, I will tell them of everything that has happened here. Do not worry, most of them will understand. Ash and the others then said their goodbyes to the man, but before they could prepare to leave, Pikachu ran up to Ash and pulled on his pant leg. What is it buddy? He asked as he looked down at his first Pokémon. Pikachu. He then bounded back over to Diglett, where V was at, and pointed at the ground type. Pikachu. Pika Pi Pikachu Pi. Ash walked up to them and knelt down, understanding what Pikachu was saying as he looked at Diglett in surprise. Really? Is that true Diglett? Diglett. The small ground type answered in a positive reply as its eyes smiled and nodded to him. What is it Ash? Giselle asked. Diglett wants to come with me, he answered as he looked back at his friends with a smile. That's what Pikachu and V have been talking about with it. His friends as well appeared surprised, but Ash just looked back at Diglett again. Are you sure you want to come with me Diglett? Once more, he received an affirmative nod. Diglett. Well alright. Ash pulled a Pokeball from his backpack and held it out. Welcome to the family Diglett. He then tapped the ball to Diglett's head and watched the small Pokemon get sucked inside of it. Then, as he held the ball in his hand, it didn't even rattle once before the Pokeball dinged and stars left the ball to signify a successful capture. Standing up afterwards, Ash held the Pokeball into the air and gave the peace sign with his other hand. Yeah, I've got a Diglett. Still not entirely used to having two Pokémon jump onto his shoulders at one time, Pikachu and V hopped up onto their trainer to give their chance of celebration, but poor Ash wasn't expecting it and got knocked face first to the ground. As he raised his head up with mud now coating his face, the nonplussed boy just smiled and then laughed. Well, with a Diglett I guess I better get used to all the dirt and mud. His friends and the foreman all shared a laugh at that while, on the other side of the massive dirt mound covering the destroyed dam, Jessie and her two teammates finally appeared from out of the earth and laid limply on their bellies. Half in and half out. I think I swallowed about a bucket full of dirt. James coughed as he laid his face on the side of the mound. And it's going to take me hours to wash all this dirt out of my hair. Jessie whined in a voice that was just as tired and defeated as her comrade. I guess this is what it means when they say you've bit dust. Meowth only had his torso and arms free and his charm was covered in mud and dirt. Sighing in defeat, all three of them mumbled just as a large piece of the give a damn sign fell from the top of the mound and landed on them. Team Rocket is all buried up again.